jumping straight into this. You have a weapon skeleton mesh. Inside the mesh, it has a bone system structure and it has sockets. The particular socket that we're going to be dealing with for spawning projectiles is this one right here. The projectile will be spawned at this socket's location in the game world. To see that, actually, let me just go ahead and developer bones play. Equip my aim. Pause break. Eject out. Alright, so now we can see all the bones and sockets for the skeletal meshes. And this one right here on the end is where the projectile is going to be spawned in this instance. So if I was to fire a shot right now, that's where the projectile will spawn. Now, as far as projectiles, they're pretty much simply projectile movement. It's an actor class. You can see that over here. It's an actor class with projectile movement component as the root. And then you have the projectile collision and then any kind of mesh that you want to have with it. And I just added a directional arrow to help explain trajectory and forward velocity, direction, and so forth of the projectile once it has spawned. So I want to show you that in level. Let me see. Let me just grab a projectile and add it. So by default, this projectile is pretty daggone small. So I have to scale it up and make it visible. So now there it is. It's x-axis, it's y-axis, and it's z. And the arrow is dead on the z. So what this will show is when I change the rotation. Let me grab this. Now that's the direction this projectile is going to take off at. As soon as I press play, boom, that's where it's going. And to get a better sense of this, I'm going to go ahead and play. Equip my gun. Alright, we got some firing. And alright, I got a few projectiles in. Basically, I just paused. I'm going to eject out of my character. And you're going to see the direction of each one of these. And you can see that they're, because I was moving, they're not in line with each other. But their angle, their starting trajectory angle is shown there. Even when they're falling, it's going to maintain, the arrow is going to maintain that direction. So that's just the base principles. Now, when we get into the actual projectiles movement, we have two variables that we can play with for the actual forward X, Y, and Z and all that stuff. So we have initial speed, which is initial speed of the projectile. If greater than 0, this will override the initial velocity value and instead treat velocity as a direction. So if this is anything greater than 0, anything set here is just applied as a direction. So if I was to go back to my default 1000 initial speed, that's 1000 centimeters a second. It's not a whole lot when you start applying it and looking at it. It just like spawns and drops. Down here I have my direction set at 1 on forward. So 1 on X. X is always forward or backward. If I did a -1, it would go backward. if I do positive y, it goes right, negative y, it goes left. Positive z, up, negative z, down. And that's how velocity is done. So I can actually technically take this to 0 and apply my 1,000 here for a forward trajectory. And that's what you always just want to apply a forward on projectile spawn from a weapon. I'm going to set this back to default. Now, in my construction script, so basically when this is spawned, when it's constructing, I'm passing in an initial speed value into the spawn node, and this is going to update this to the actual projectile setup that I want. So let me get into the firing sequence. So basically I'm taking from a config, I have a muzzle velocity, so for an M416 it would be 880 centimeters a second, and passing that in as my speed. And that's how I normally set it up. Now we get into the projectile transform, and this is the basics of it. First step is to find out which camera the player is currently using. If they're using first person or third person, in my setup is going to be the current camera, because I have two cameras, first and third. And I'm going to set a local variable for the projectile camera. And then I'm going to take that projectile camera and get its world location. Where is it in the world? And I'm going to get its forward vector. What direction is forward, straight ahead? And I'm going to multiply that by a float, and I'm going to add these two values together to get an endpoint for my line trace. So the start of my line trace is right at my camera. It's world location, dead on my camera, because camera's center of screen is technically always center on your screen, exactly where your crosshairs are going to be. And this forward vector times a float is actually saying, hey, what's the length of that line trace? How long do you want me to shoot this from start to end? How long do you want that line trace to be? And we take that value, that return result, and we're going to break it to get all this information here. Now I'm taking the return value, true if it was a hit, false otherwise, and I'm using it to select a vector. So if I hit something, I'm going to pick A, the impact location of that hit. Otherwise, I'm going to use B, the trace endpoint, whatever this value results in. From there, I'm getting the gun mesh, and then I'm going to get the socket. I'm getting this socket right here, its location. I'm going to get its socket location, and then I'm going to take that and get a find look at rotation. So the vector or the socket, where is it at in the world, and the endpoint, either the impact or the trace end, and I'm going to calculate. Let me just show you what this looks like by default. Look, it returns a rotation. So what we're trying to do here is take the socket location, and we want to rotate it. Let me show you with that projectile again. Where did I put it? Let me get back over here. We're going to get the socket location, and we want to rotate the basically get the angle. We want to find the angle it would take to fire that projectile so that it intersects our crosshairs. And I'm going to show you that intersect again. doesn't have the speed to get there, but I'll go in ADS. So no matter what I'm doing here, we're crossing that crosshair. We're shooting it. If I have the speed, let me get into projectile. Let me bump this up. Bump this up a little bit. See how we're getting it now? It's going so fast. Let's go down here and see something. See, it's going to hit where my crosshairs are aiming at. Wherever my crosshair is aimed at, that's where the projectile is going to hit. We can go back in this camera. So that's how we get the angle of the projectile to actually intersect that little white crosshair. We're going to shoot out the projectile towards the forward vector of where that line trace either ends or where it hits. So at here, this distance, we're going to hit the end point of the trace is the intersect point, or where we want the projectile's trajectory to cross. So that's the basics of that chunk of code. I have it in here so I break this. Let's see, we can split it, and then I'm taking the pitch, and that's where I'm doing for zero pitch, so I can adjust the pitch for a near zero and a far zero. And then we pack that all together into a make rotator, and then we pass it off to the transform. But as far as the firing sequence goes, I get the projectile transform and I pass it to the fire sequence function, and that's where we get into all this craziness. So that transform value, we're throwing it in, and boom, let's go. We're going to use the muzzle velocity, speed, and here's the transform, and have a nice day. We're good to go. Now when you start dealing with using the velocity of it instead, see how I'm going through here and I'm getting the actor's forward vector, and I'm multiplying it by whatever value I set here so we can have a nice fast projectile versus his base movement. And then we have the character movement getting the velocity of character movement, and that's that velocity we're going to apply. It would normally in a vehicle, it would be the vehicle's movement, its velocity, and we're going to add that together and throw it in here and into the actual spawn actor, which will be the projectile. We get into the projectile, we'll be doing something like this instead. That right there. We're taking the projectile movement, we're taking that owner vector that we just passed in, which is basically this right here, and we're setting the velocity, we're overriding the speed. And to actually show that, I'm going to set this to 0, and I'm going to set this to 0, and what we should get, let me compile everything out. Things good. Play. And what we'll get is, see that? So that, because the rotation is still being applied on that transform, let me see. It's automatically just shooting off to the left. And when I'm on this side, you can look up at the top of the screen, I have a rotation in purple. That -171 is my rotation right now in world. See that? This direction it's negative, so when I spawn a projectile, it's just coming back and hitting me. And there it is, right there. So it's funky. In order to fix that, I have to pop this, split it, because I want to be able to see it. And we're going to just do the location. That's it. We're only going to pass the location in. No rotation. Equip the gun. See? Now we're shooting forward, but look at that offset angle. See where the arrow is pointing on that projectile. And now it's going that way. It's going that way, like it's supposed to, because we're overriding. We're not applying a rotation to the projectile. We're just doing velocity. See, when I go forward, everything's straight. When I'm not moving, everything goes where it's supposed to. But we're not getting that upward arc towards the crosshair. We're losing that. Left, right. I can rotate, and when I move right, everything's going. So that's that. I can maybe go in and adjust this out a little bit. So make this 1,000. Yeah, it's a little bit faster, but that offset, that angular offset, is basically spread. The shot is coming directly out of the barrel at an angle, left and right angle, versus curving into where it wants to. So with this right now, if I wanted to hit the vehicle at a fast speed, I'd be like, you see what I have to, my offset, my aim offset that I have to get it to go towards the vehicle. So that's in general it. Hope it was insightful. Hit me back with questions.